You have an idea, you want to write a novel, but every time you sit down to do it, you freeze. The plot doesn't make any sense and the characters do look good on paper, but every time you try and write in one of their voices, you have no idea what to say. You start to think maybe you just aren't cut out for being a writer. So you look online for help because surely the internet's gonna have all the answers, right? And without fail, every blog post or Instagram reel tells you to follow this beat sheet, follow the hero's journey, build out your outline first, or build out your world. What if I told you that those might be the worst places to start? Welcome to my new writerly craft series, Back to Basics, but better, where we take classic writing advice and make it actually helpful. So when you write your first book, you are probably obsessed with getting things moving and getting them to actually feel like a real novel. So you try to make sure that you are following the proper structure that's expected of a novel. Or if you're writing fantasy, you think that you need to build a solid world first so that, potentially you don't run into plot holes down the line. But you don't need all of that just to start. Overloading your story prep is basically like trying to put together a puzzle before you've even dumped out all of the pieces on the table. You can't see the full picture yet, only the little pieces, and that's okay. And what a lot of newer writers don't realize is that your first draft is not supposed to be your final draft. In a lot of cases, it's not actually supposed to even be good. That's why a lot of traditional methods like starting with a full outline or building out your entire world don't work for everyone. They're not bad tools, but they often assume that you already know the story that you want to tell. And if you're still trying to actually find your story, then using those tools can actually end up hindering and stifling your process of actually creatively discovering what you are writing about. Usually that process of discovery needs to happen in order for you to find the best version of your story. And if you limit yourself into boxes before you even really know what you're doing, you're very likely to end up writing a formulaic book, not connecting to your own characters, never figuring out what you're even trying to say with your story, possibly also just hating what you write. Writing a novel is emotional and vulnerable and messy. So let's start right there. We're gonna forget about plot just for a second, and I'm gonna give you 3 safer alternative ways that you can actually plunge into your story. Number 1, to no one's surprise, is going to be starting with a character. Ask, who is that person that I cannot stop thinking about? What's eating them alive? What's one thing that they desperately want but they can't have? It's basically a character premise, so like the emotional engine of a character. That one thing that makes you want to follow that person to the end of the world. For example, you could start with a girl who just wants to disappear, or with a boy who lies every time he opens his mouth, or with a lonely woman who's building a shrine in secret. And I think you can already feel the questions kind of bubbling up just from these tiny slivers of ideas. Why does the girl want to disappear? What happened to her? What does she want? What prompts the boy to lie every time he speaks? Is it a condition? Is he under some kind of pressure? What is he actually hoping to achieve by telling lies? What is the lonely woman dedicating her shrine to? What or who could mean so much to her that she goes to such lengths? And what does she actually want from them? This is often the easiest and most honest way in, because once you know your character, you can start asking these questions that are going to lead you to a story. So these questions, I'm going to lay them out for you so you can follow them along if you are building your story out as you watch this video, which I hope you are. That could be pretty awesome. And if you are, please drop it in the comments if this was helpful and if you are following along. So the first question is, why is this their story? Why now? What happens? What is the pivotal point? Why are we joining them at this point in their life? Why not at another point? What's going to change for them, or what is going to finally break them? How are they going to grow? What will they learn? What is that wound that they are carrying, and what makes this the moment that shifts? Because all that a story really is just a pivotal moment of a character's life. And starting with your character means that you are starting with the emotional heart of your story, not just building like a plot-shaped shell that you then have to find a cardboard character to sort of carry the premise. The premise is the character, as it always should be. Number 2, start with a question or a theme. What is that emotional knot that you want to untangle? What belief or truth are you circling around, even if you're not exactly sure what you feel about it yet? It could be a question like, what does it mean to be chosen? Can love survive resentment? What if you did the worst thing that you could imagine? And then once you have that core question, try to take it a step deeper and niche it down. So try to identify what specific version of that question are you actually interested in. And ideally, this version of the question should feel emotionally true to either you or the character that you are writing about. What does it mean to be chosen by a parent who doesn't know how to love themselves, so they put their expectations for themselves on you? Can love survive resentment when the person who hurt you really thought they were protecting you? What if the worst thing you did was also the first time you liked yourself? When you find that more specific version, you will feel it hit different. That's usually where the core of your story lives. And from there, you can start shaping your characters kind of like a thought experiment. What I usually tell my clients is try to let each character sort of represent an angle of the argument. So if we take the first question as an example, and I'll put it back on the screen here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So one of your characters in your novel could be an overachiever, so kind of constantly looking for approval from their parents to prove that they are worthy of their attention. And then you might have another character who resents that pressure and kind of just sabotages every opportunity that they're given. And then a third character might just completely reject the idea of being special. They might think that being chosen just means being used. And then as they clash and they make different choices, your story is just gonna naturally start forming that sort of conflict. And as we know, conflict is the life juice of every story. Anyway, you don't have to know the answer to that thematic question when you start. In fact, you probably shouldn't. You might think you do, but the beautiful thing about discovery writing is that your answer will probably shift and evolve as you write your story. And that's honestly, in my opinion, the most honest way to approach it. It's kind of like writing a thesis. Basically, your thematic question becomes your hypothesis, your characters become your test subjects, and the novel is kind of like your research playing field. The third method is to just start with a single moment. So sometimes you don't need a premise, you don't need a plan, you don't even need a character name. You can also just start with like that one scene or flicker of emotion or vibe that's been stuck in your head. Usually it's like a visual that won't leave you alone. You might actually think that this idea is just enough to fill out a short story. I think we've all been there. But I'm a firm believer that you can make basically a novel out of anything as long as you just keep asking enough questions about whatever your premise is. So to give you a couple of examples, maybe you start with the image of a bride wandering the side of a motorway at 3 a.m. barefoot. Or you could start with this scene of a daughter lying to her father about where she was when she comes home late and he knows that she's lying. Or you could even just start with two strangers sharing a cigarette. So moments like these are pretty potent because they don't ask you to immediately know everything that's going on. They just kind of invite you to figure it out as you write. So you could start by asking, what's the tension in this moment? Why does this moment matter to these characters? What actually led up to this moment? What do these characters wish was different about their life? And then that tiny image, the lost bride or the cigarette, they can become sort of a gateway opening to your story. And the fun thing about it is that you don't have to justify or explain anything. You're just writing the moment that pulled you in. And most times, these particular moments actually slap as novel openings. So I would encourage you to try this method if you haven't already. It's those scenes that haunt us that are usually like a signal to where your story wants to start. Okay, let's talk about what you don't need in order to start writing your novel, despite what a lot of writing advice out there might make you believe. You don't need a 15-page outline. You don't need a Pinterest board, but if you want to make one for your soul, no one's stopping you. You don't need the perfect first line. Trust me, the beginning is something that you're gonna revise at least 100 times before you get to that final draft. I speak from experience. You don't need a beat sheet, a world building spreadsheet, or to know what your character eats for breakfast every morning. Now, don't get me wrong, these things can become useful later, but you don't need them to start with. And for a lot of people, they are just distractions that kind of make you feel like you're being productive, but they're really just feeding your fear of actually writing. And I know, because I've been working with writers as a writing coach for years, that at the very beginning, the pressure of getting everything right can stop you from writing anything at all. What you do need is some space to explore, to have fun, to ask messy questions, to follow some weird ideas and not worry about where they're actually going to lead you. And there's no rule to say that you can't just sit down and write your first few chapters just to feel things out and then go back and do a little bit more groundwork and do a little bit more outlining. Writing is not a linear process for most people. It's not always going to be as easy as step 1, create deeply complex, flawed human character. Step 2, plot out the entire story with perfect beats and reversals. Step 3, write the words. That's not how it works in like 99% of the cases. And when we kind of force ourselves to operate that way, then we're going to end up being upset when it doesn't work. But I think the most important thing for any writer to remember is, when you let yourself kind of play with the ideas that you have and discover your story as you write, you're gonna usually end up having a better time writing, and you're probably gonna like what you write a lot more. And I just want to reiterate that some of the best discoveries that you're gonna make about your story are gonna happen while you're writing, not while you're outlining. That's why I always say the sooner you start actually putting down words on a page, the better. So if you want help mapping out your idea quickly without getting lost in the plotting overwhelm, I do actually have a free PDF novel plan. It's got focus questions that kind of help you set up the core of your novel fast so that you can just jump into writing as soon as possible. The link to grab it is going to be in the description box. Until then, I would love to know, tell me what project you are currently working on, or drop a sunflower emoji if you are still kind of figuring it out. Tell me if you're going to test out one of these methods to start out your book. Which one of them spoke to you, and do you already have some ideas? Let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. But until next time, trust your heart and the words will come.